if you're interested, you can find some of the past recordings on our YouTube page and website. Chris, next slide, please. So just to keep a little bit of housekeeping rules, so the discussion is being recorded today. It will be sent out to you at the end of the event via email. If you have any questions, please use the chat window to ask the questions, or alternatively, just put your hand up in the Teams raise your hand function, and I'll call it out and you can ask your question freely. And then as well, we've got a panel of speakers today to cover some of those topics and questions that you guys have. So I'll just introduce myself. My name's George Zakowski. I'm one of the senior cloud consultants here at CubeSys. I've worked in the end user computing space for over 12 years, and I have lots of experience with VMware Horizon, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365, SCCM, Intune, all that good stuff. I've also obtained the Azure Virtual Desktop Specialty Certification and pretty much deployed over 40 projects in my time here with CubeSys. So that's a little bit about me. Might hand over to Chris, if you could introduce yourself, please.
No worries. Good morning, everyone. So my name's Chris Hales. I'm also a senior cloud consultant here at CubeSys. I come from a slightly more network infrastructure storage kind of background, really strong kind of 15 to 20 years of experience in that space. I'm a certified Azure architect, and I've also done, obviously, the AVD specialty as well. My focus in this part of this conversation is more around the network and the security components and how we can bring network and security into the AVD world. And I might ask Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Michael Harvartis. So I'm the sales engineer for Nerdio. Been with Nerdio for almost half a year now, but I've got a long history in the virtual desktop space as well. So I've worked for a number of SIs and vendors directly in the space. Yeah, and happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Ray?
Yeah, hi. Right. Yeah, thank you, everyone. And hi, yeah, and good morning. And my name is Ray, and I'm the cloud solution architect working at Microsoft Australia. I'm based in Sydney. So I mainly focus on the hybrid cloud services and the Azure security solutions. And my role is like, providing the architecture design for the customers, across all the Asia and APAC, and including ANZ customers. Yeah, thank you.
So I guess to kick off the conversation, and hopefully George will help steer us when we kind of go astray and go astray. But I guess the main reason I'm putting up the reference architecture right now is to kind of remind everybody what AVD looks like from a reference architecture perspective, because it has so many different elements to it. So it's important that we're always mindful of, okay, well, this is the reference and this is what AVD looks like on a broad scale. And hopefully we'll touch on different points and components of this reference architecture as we go through securing and also the network components of securing and AVD. So I just wanted to put it up there just for a moment, just to kind of give us all a bit of time to reflect on it. This one's obviously a little bit customized. We've put things like internet access inside that because we obviously feel that we need to raise awareness around how we provide internet access inside these environments and how that can then also be secured.
Sorry, thanks, Chris. I literally just dropped off just as Ray finished introducing himself, and my monitors went blank. I don't know what the hell happened there, but yes, I'm back now, and it is live. It's not recorded, so that's good. Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. So basically, I guess coming from a AVD point of view, as Chris mentioned, this is your typical reference architecture that most scenarios or most customers will look to deploy in their organization. I guess some of the key things here to talk about really are, we've got connectivity from the on-prem environment over into Azure via Express Route VPN, whatever the case might be. And then, you've got hub subscriptions, Azure Virtual Desktop subscriptions, or you might throw sort of everything in the same subscription there. But if we look at some of the arrows and the diagrams, there are a couple of things to mention there. So like if we look at the green arrow, it's specifically keeping internet traffic from AVD inside Azure. We're not sort of leaving Azure or sort of traversing the express route on-prem and then hairpinning and sending traffic back up and things like that. So I guess question for the guys on the call. I mean, is that what we're seeing a lot of customers doing these days, or is that something that people prefer to send all traffic on-prem? They might need something to be inspected via on-prem firewalls, that kind of stuff. They might have proxies on-prem. Like, what's sort of the generic, I guess the deployment that people are doing nowadays?
Yeah, look, I can definitely step in on that. From our experience at CubeSys, we're definitely seeing a high majority of customers wanting to keep traffic native, so keeping traffic in Azure. We do get the occasional outlier that has a really matured on-premise internet gateway solution that they want to utilize and maximize. So we do see the occasional flow of, okay, move all the internet traffic back to on-prem and out through their secure gateways, or using third parties like Zscaler and components like that. But yeah, ultimately, being a native first kind of approach, obviously you would want to keep the traffic as close as you can to the destination.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we're looking at things like, you've got OneDrive and Microsoft 365 services, email, all that kind of stuff, right? So it only makes sense for that traffic to just stay inside Azure and sort of, next hop over to its destination rather than traversing additional hops and additional latency and all that kind of stuff. One thing we can see there in the diagram is it's got Nerdio down the bottom, right? So, Michael, maybe do you want to give just a quick overview of what that Nerdio component is doing there and sort of how it's deployed in the customer environment?
Yeah, sure. So Nerdio is basically a product that just extends the native capabilities of AVD. So it's just all native Azure PaaS services that get deployed. And we create a single pane of glass in like a web GUI to do everything you can think of in managing an AVD environment. So things like, image management, host pool creation management, app attach, RBAC controls monitoring, and much more, but it's all in a single pane of glass.
It basically adds on automation and advanced skill sets that I guess Azure Native doesn't, right? I mean,
yeah. So it like Azure Native, it does have some auto scaling capability, but we enhance that with different scaling our capability, and we also have the ability to scale in to save our customers on Azure costs. It's all deployed by the Azure Marketplace. It gets deployed to our the customer subscription. So it's securely placed in their subscription using their guardrails. So any company policy they have around Azure policies and network restrictions, they can apply that on top of it as well.
Yeah, awesome. So then you can use additional things like multi-factor authentication when you hit that sort of that endpoint URL where you want to manage your devices via Nerdio, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We can apply MFA or conditional access policy that can all be configured.
Yeah, awesome. What about things like probably more so a question over to Ray, like when it comes to connectivity, I can see that there are storage accounts that things need to connect to, virtual machines need to connect to that, and then you've got obviously the AVD PaaS service and whatnot. I mean, things like private endpoints and that. Is that what we're sort of seeing customers take on, as they go on and deploy new deployments, or sort of how do they look at doing their, I guess, their networking in that regard?
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. So from the AVD that that we give the customer the VDI environment, and they are not only to access the public internet, but they also need to access some our corp resource, and we also have a lot of resources that is deployed on top of the Azure PaaS services and Azure SaaS services, and normally those services, they are exposed to the public internet, and it gives us a public IP address on the public internet, and that traffic can't be monitored and can't be controlled by the corporate network. So what we want to do is to attach or to have a private endpoint that attach to your virtual network, and just give you a private link through your control everything, all the traffic within your private network. So from the VDI environment that the user, when they access, for example, like when they access Azure storage account, or when they access any website that deployed on the Azure App Services, they can just go through this private endpoint. And we have another technology, it's called Azure Private Link. So that enabled all your traffic is within your control on your private environment. And with that you can have the Azure Firewall, you can have a lot of security controls that have been deployed.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think we've got a slide on some of the new stuff with AVD Private Link and Azure Firewall. We'll probably get into a little bit more depth, but it's good to know that those those technologies and solutions are there to, I guess, sort of harden those services, right? Because you don't want them going over the
right.
internet. I mean, it's sort of, the Microsoft backbone network, but again, there are security teams out there that want to have full visibility of that traffic and whatnot. Cool. Chris, do you want to jump into the next slide?
Sure. I guess one of the things and some of the key things I'm hearing from that part of the conversation is obviously Active Directory and conditional access, and Michael alluded to the fact that Nerdio conforms to the guardrails that are applied by the customer, which means that they're also applied to whatever Active Directory conditional access policies that are in place, like requiring MFA and things like that. But also AVD is controlled by the same construct, right? So it's integrated into Azure Active Directory. So whatever conditional access policies apply to AVD as well as other components inside the environment. I guess the other things that you could probably think about, and I want to open this up obviously to Michael and Ray to comment as well, but MFA is obviously a big push on MFA with identity protection, but also things like having the visibility of logging. The graphic may not be the best for this selection, but when you've got signals from all these different sources like activity logs, Active Directory logging, session host logging, key vault logging, storage account logging, there's so much logging that's available inside the solution. I think the other side of that is also making sure that you've got, and I always, from a security perspective, security people always want to know what's happening inside the environment, who's accessing what and when are they accessing it, but also they're always interested in understanding how do we detect a failure, a fault, or a breach, or a compromised account. And whilst there's logging in all these other different areas for specifically AAD around identifying those things, we also need to make sure that we have a full view of our environment in SIEM platforms like Sentinel, and I'll mention other competitors as well, obviously Splunk and Sumo Logic and things like that. If you're going to have a SIEM solution, you want to have all those logging components in one place so that you can have a full view of your security environment. I guess, Ray, maybe to you first. How do you see Sentinel playing a role inside AVD?
Right. So I just a little bit to circle back to the topic you just mentioned for the user logging activities. So right now that we know that we have a lot of people, they're working from home, they use their own devices, they're working from everywhere, and they can just connect to our corporate network from any public network. And in a lot of cases that in the past that we don't have that visibility that which user use what kind of the device from what location that trying to access what resource at what time. So those kind of the information actually that is very, very important for today's corporate cybersecurity control. And we want to have the understanding about that so we can understand the user behavior, and then from the behavior by analyzing all the log data that we can say, okay, if there are any malicious behavior or any, maybe attacking that behind of the user account. So sometimes that that maybe today that I have an employee's account that has already been compromised, and the compromised account that has been tried to log into your Office 365, log into your OneDrive, log into your VDI, AVD, log into your VPN environment, but that could be happened at different time from different IP address. And if we just use the traditional way that just look at each individual security log, and it's hard to find the clue that maybe this event they are relevant and they are all pointing to one same attacker. But the same solution like the Microsoft Sentinel, it tries to collect all the logs from everywhere and just capture all the signals from each services, from your application level, from your user behavior level, to the very bottom from your network and your infrastructure, all the logs collectively get together and do some correlation analysis. Then from there that we can say, okay, so today there is a account that the first login trying was happened in US, and the next second that happened in Australia and from different devices. And those behavior is very, very strange because it's a typical behavior, not like the employee they normally do every day. So from Sentinel, that it gives us the comprehensive view about, okay, what is the event happening behind of those user accounts and behind of your host machines, your IP address, and also the user try to access any URL, any malicious URL that will be captured, and then give you a timeline about what's happening in your environment. So that is the value the Sentinel as a SIEM solution Microsoft can provide to you.
Okay. Awesome.
That's awesome. See, like that's, single pane of glass. That's what I'm hearing a lot of the time. And a lot of people these days, they want a single pane of glass where they just go in and see everything consolidated in one single view. You don't have to go and dig through logs and things like that to go and find what you're looking for. So that's awesome. On the other side of that, I mean, yes, we can look at sort of what's happening. We've got all the log analytics stuff pointing to Sentinel, and we can see where our users are coming in and whatnot. But, Nerdio has also got its own sort of agent that sort of integrates inside the Nerdio suite called Sepago, right? And I myself in the past have used a lot of its logging and its analytics to figure out, why users might be taking a long time to log into a session host, for example, right? So do you want to expand a little bit on that, Michael, and just
yeah. So first of all, completely agree with you guys about like having that central pane of glass to holistically look at your issues. And Nerdio can obviously forward their logs onto any SIEM product. With our Sepago agent, it's more of a monitoring, and it can provide historical reporting. So it's a really good product. It gives you like a 10,000 foot of the environment, but as you said, George, if there's issues, you can actually drill down, so you can pick a specific user, see what's going on with that user. If they've got like a high latency network, you can align it to if there's performance issues on the host or storage at the time. So it's a really good product to align it to that.
I think the other thing as well, I mean, with both products, right? I mean, Sentinel and Sepago, they both come with pre-built dashboards, right? So there's no really need to like go in there and customize and sit around trying to figure out what you need. Like out of the box, they both come with, this, I guess, massive information. You got drilled down little menus that you can sort of look into and sort of follow like a breadcrumb trail and figure out where something's coming from. So that's actually really cool that it's got that stuff. One interesting thing to note there, I mean, with conditional access, for example, I had a customer a little while ago when AVD was first introduced back when lockdown came in, and it was really interesting because at the time they were a little bit umming and ahhing around the solution, and this is going back to when it was Windows Virtual Desktop before it was rebranded to AVD. And that one thing that they did for their customers was they got every single person's or every single site's IP address and whitelisted only that IP address and blacklisted everything else. So just as they were coming out of lockdown and then going back into the office, they didn't want their users to be working remotely from around the world, or they didn't want people from around the world to potentially log into their environment. So they just put like a whitelist rule around that, blocked everything except for their known public IPs, whether it's at home, in the office, whatever, and they were able to secure it that way. So there's some really good controls around what you can lock down, who you can lock down, what to do,
and that always comes at like a price, right? Because when you do like something as granular as that, I think the one thing that I always have to remind people of is that the operational overhead, right, for the IT team to maintain such a dynamic list. We all have home internet, and a lot of us have dynamic IP addresses at home. So, having to then raise a call to IT to say, hey, look, I've changed IP addresses. Can you include this? So it's one of those, it's risk and reward kind of scenarios with conditional access when you go to that kind of level of detail. But at least with the built-in kind of workflows, you can at least block countries. So you can just say, all right, if it's an IP address that's associated to Australia, then allow it to come in, for example. So you can take a slightly broader approach on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Chris, you want to jump over to the next slide? Let's get into a little bit around the Azure Firewall and some of its sort of capabilities that it can do. So, I mean, obviously, one of the key benefits of integrating AVD with Azure Firewall is that, you don't really have to worry about entering URLs manually these days. It's all handled by service tags, and it's sort of like a set and forget thing. Microsoft will go away and update those URLs and whatnot as needed. But what about like any other sort of advantages for, I guess, businesses these days to deploy an Azure Firewall over, say, some sort of other third-party solution or something like that we can think of? Is there any use cases around that?
Right. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. So just like you mentioned, George. So the Azure Firewall, it gives you the Azure specialized firewall kind of the solution, and it can help you easily to set up your firewall rules. Like you mentioned that we have the service tag, we have the FQD attached. So for a lot of people that you don't familiar with the Azure network, and you can just easily use a service tag. For example, like I can allow the traffic from my AVD to the Azure SQL database, or stop or prevent the traffic from this service to another service. So it can be very easily to be set up. And another thing is the Azure Firewall, that is a cloud native solution. And the good thing is there is no maintenance cost. So it's like you don't need to worry about the updates or the upgrades. So that means that there is no downtime from the maintenance, right? And that is everything is deployed just on the cloud as a PaaS services. So it can scale out or scale in based on your demands of your traffic. So you don't need to worry about like, okay, how many kind of the VM, how many CPU cores that I need to provision for my traffic. Tomorrow, if there is a very high peak traffic, do I need to scale out manually? You don't need to worry about that everything. So it can be scaled very smoothly and automatically. Depends on your traffic change. And as the Azure services, so everything can be template managed. So together with your AVD environment, that right now that we have a lot of AVD, so many customers that they define the environment in their template. They use the infrastructure as code to deploy, to manage, and to replicate the environment from one location to another region. So Azure Firewall can be part of your template. You can easily just define everything in your or bicep template, and you integrate with your Azure DevOps pipeline. And tomorrow, if you want to set up a new environment for a new branch for another regions, easy. It's so easy. You just trigger the pipeline and everything that will be deployed automatically. So I think that's make our network security control much easier.
I think another point in this part is also the reasoning why you should put a firewall in. I think it's sometimes often not often lost. I think it's definitely not lost in customers with Kubesys, obviously, because it's one of the things we always talk about. But why would you put a firewall in place? And I've always gone back to my customers and gone, well, you've got a firewall on-prem, right? When you've got an internet service on-prem, you've got a firewall. You want to have visibility of the traffic. You want to have an aggregation point so that you can control what traffic is allowed and not allowed. So why would you do it any differently inside the cloud? And I think Azure Firewall is definitely giving us that platform as a service offering that enables us to do exactly what we would on-prem in the cloud. I think the one key call out I always make with the Azure Firewall is there is a standard and a premium. And one key feature difference around that is if you're using it for web categorization, you need to be on the premium tier. So web categorization and web filtering occurs in the premium tier of the Azure Firewall SKU, and it can be utilized. I have seen some customers, not all customers, but some customers move away from external secure gateway products to using Azure Firewall and web categorization because it had enough features and function inside that to achieve what they were looking for. So the other thing around this is making sure that we're always considering how an AVD environment can be secured and how its network connectivity can also be secured. So having a firewall in a central location, like a hub VNet, for example, if you're following an enterprise architecture, it might be in a connectivity kind of landing zone. And you might have an inbound, obviously, because you can do destination-based NATing and source-based NATing. So you can do that level 4 kind of function around NATs as well. So it is maybe not as there are some features in some of the other vendors like Checkpoint and FortiGate and Cisco that may have some more additional features, and Palo Alto would be another good example there, which may have some additional features in it. But again, coming to a cloud native approach, definitely Azure Firewall will, in almost all enterprise environments, meet at least 95, if not higher, percentage of their requirements.
Yeah, you know what else I find? I mean, when people think of firewall, they think of inbound traffic, right? We're essentially trying to protect, threats from the outside world coming in. But when you look at the other way around, right? People don't normally think about this, but if there was a machine that was infected and we are trying to go out and spread onto the other network, right? This is where these firewalls come into play. You just looking at that diagram there, the fact that it's got Microsoft Threat Intelligence known for IPs. So that's like intrusion prevention system in detection, auto blocking, all that kind of stuff. People might even look at this, for using like a AVD host pool that's like a privileged access workstation, right? Where they can only get to a certain subset of resources. So rather than using NSGs and that kind of stuff, you have a more granular level of, applying destination filtering ports, URLs through an Azure Firewall. So I think a lot of people overlook that.
And that's right. And the firewall is more or less a centralization of NSGs, right? Because the NSGs are applied at the VM level, subnet levels, right? So they're defined at very granular locations. So managing NSGs on scale can be a bit of a problem. Whereas if you centralize your traffic flow through something like Azure Firewall, then you've got that central point of control and central point of configuration. So I'm not saying don't use NSGs, because definitely you still want to use NSGs for your specific requirement. But if you're going to have, I would probably just recommend that people consider the differences between using NSGs and a firewall, or just a firewall, or just NSGs.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right, I think going over on to the next slide, Chris, talk a little bit about ExpressRoute.
Yes. So one of my topics, definitely.
Go for it.
Look, ExpressRoute is so yes. Look, obtaining connectivity from on-prem to your AVD environment or to your Azure environment in general. Two key ways of doing that. Technically, three kind of key ways if you consider the virtual WAN hub. So virtual WAN hub, if you're an SD-WAN solution, definitely consider something like the secure WAN hub. If you're looking at more dedicated connectivity that doesn't use your transit services, you'd look at something like ExpressRoute, which has got a lot of resilience built into it. Also has the capability to allow you to route from on-prem to the Azure public services and Microsoft public services. So you've got those two connections where you've got peering, just like you would, and for any network engineers on the call, obviously you've got the transit, you've got peering networks. You can utilize your ExpressRoute to access the peering, to get to the peering services inside Azure and Microsoft 365. And you can also use private connections to connect to your virtual networks. So yes, you can do this. The one key difference I always call out here is that they're from a ExpressRoute, because it's a point-to-point service or a point-to-point link essentially, and you're essentially traversing layer 2, there's no real encryption. So there's no real security advantage over it. There are some advantages you can with ExpressRoute, like MAC control. So you can have that, at least that first level of defense, but there is no additional, I guess, encryption over the top of it. If you wanted to place encryption over it, you could deploy an IPsec VPN, which can overlay on top of the ExpressRoute, so that you force your traffic through the IPsec tunnel. If you wanted to go to that next level of I guess, security by obscurity and removing the visibility of the traffic to the service provider for your ExpressRoute. The other side of that is that you can always, if you're looking to do a fail fast or a quick deployment and you don't have an ExpressRoute in place already, you can always fall back to using your transit, using your public internet services, and deploying a site-to-site VPN. So simply deploying a VPN on your customer edge and then deploying a VPN gateway inside your Azure virtual network. And that would achieve at least an encrypted connectivity, but it will be over the public network. So there's pros and cons when it comes to how do I connect my environment to Azure and to AVD. The other side of that, and I think we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail further down the track, is like things like private endpoints. So if you've got that environment connected and you've got the DNS recognition across both sides of it, you could also utilize things like private endpoint. But we'll go into a bit more detail about that, I think, a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, I think other things as well. I mean, at the end of the day, this is your main link into Azure, right? So then when you think about other things like the RDP Shortpath, right, for your actual VM or your AVD hosts, whether you want to bypass the public internet because you might have a poor WAN connection or something like that, and then switch over to using ExpressRoute, you'd find that there's a lot more less latency issues. It's a lot faster. You can even apply like QoS on those ports, and give that traffic higher bandwidth, that kind of stuff. So yeah, obviously, I mean, you need some sort of footprint into Azure, whether it's ExpressRoute or VPN, but yeah, I guess Chris calling out that kind of stuff, especially around the security, the security on a typical Azure ExpressRoute, and overlaying with IPsec just to encrypt that traffic. Yeah, just something that probably most people won't be aware of.
Yeah.
What about the connection flow, Chris? I think if we go to the next slide, just a quick overview of, I guess, how AVD, or how users connect to the AVD service sort of out of the box. Generally speaking, when we have our virtual machines running in Azure over on the far right-hand side, they're running an agent. That agent is the AVD agent, and that phones home. So it talks to that middle cluster there where it says Azure Virtual Desktop Microsoft Managed Azure Services. So that's the PaaS service or the PaaS offering that Microsoft has. That agent is always phoning home saying, hello, I belong to tenant A. I'm assigned to this host pool. These are the users that have access permission to me. So as we go through the connection flow, we can see that agent's always phoning home when it's on. If we flick to the next part, when a user launches the AVD client, they connect to Azure AD, so they get their usual, MFA prompts, conditional access, whatever the case is, and then they get an Azure AD token. From the next point on, they get access to the broker, and they can see what resources that they have access to, essentially, right? From that point on, they would then click on a resource. That resource will then connect them to the Azure PaaS gateway service, and then from that point onwards, all the traffic from there will be tunneled through the Microsoft gateway to the Azure Virtual Desktop virtual machines running in your environment. So with this example, there's no outbound ports that are required. Like, we don't need to open port 3389 RDP or anything like that. Everything happens reverse connect, and we are tunneling via that gateway that I guess Microsoft are offering for us.
And a key call out there is that you're not exposing port 3389 directly on the machine, right, over public internet. Yeah. That's the key call out here, is that the gateway brokers that connection for you so that you're not having to expose it.
Yeah, absolutely. If we jump over to the next slide, this is where we start talking about AVD Shortpath. And again, this is, people thinking that, to turn AVD Shortpath on, I need to open additional ports and all that kind of stuff. But that's not the case. I mean, especially when it comes to managed networks. So managed networks are obviously being your networks that are on-prem, right? So our core office environments, our headquarters, etc. So, Chris, do you want to maybe just run through how this works for everyone, and just...
Yeah, for sure. So ultimately what we're seeing here is you've established your connection from the broker. You've now obtained your essential authentication to get into an AVD host. What it then does is it negotiates a UDP-based connection. Now, you want to use UDP for a little bit more of session reliability and a little bit more of known kind of traffic, right? So you have to trust this traffic at this point. So the default would be to use UDP 3390. And then what you're doing is allowing, through your either ExpressRoute or your site-to-site VPN, is you're allowing that connection to be established. So you're allowing direct communication from the routable resource, which would be the Azure virtual desktop host. You're going to say, I'm going to allow UDP 339 directly start. So we're still not exposing 3389 on TCP. We're exposing a different port in UDP, but essentially it'll mean that we're no longer just going to the broker, just going to the gateway.
Yeah, but we're also exposing it internally here as well, right? So it's not, again, it's not open to the public internet. And what happens with the client itself is when you do the initial connection to a resource or a desktop or whatever the case is, it will initially create the connection via the Microsoft PaaS services. And then in the background, the client is smart enough to figure out, hey, can I access these VMs via, UDP 3390? If I can, it'll seamlessly switch that connection over. And that's where you get that benefit of the low latency and all that kind of stuff. What about public networks? This one's a little bit different.
Yeah. So this is where that we may be raising the risk profile slightly to say that, hey, okay, we're going to allow UDP Shortpath on this port range. and we are going to open that up. But again, we're kind of treating this as trusted traffic, right? So we then know that, okay, we're only going to get this traffic if it's already gone through the authentication authorization process and already established its connection to the RD gateway. Very much like the private managed network scenario, it only flips to this connectivity once it's established that initial authentication authorization component.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, in between the client and the session host, obviously you'd have that Azure Firewall sitting there to do all of that intrusion detection, inspection, open the ports. You have your central sort of, I guess, single pane of glass to do all that and look at the traffic flow logs, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think this is on by default these days, right? I think Shortpath for public networks is how it comes out of the box. If you deploy AVD today, that is on by default. And if it can talk via this protocol, it'll do it unless you've got, firewalls in the way and that kind of stuff. So,
and the one thing to note here is that it's not an inbound request. So you're not allowing this on an inbound rule. The agent itself on the actual host will actually determine whether this connection is achievable, and then it will send the request. So you're not necessarily opening them up on an inbound request, you're opening it out on an outbound.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about private link then for AVD. Probably more so a question for Ray. Ray, do you want to maybe elaborate a little bit more around this? I know you mentioned it earlier, but what are we essentially trying to beat here? Like, we're trying to replace the public accessible AVD PaaS service, right, and integrate it in our VNet and talk over that link. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So for those PaaS and SaaS services that you can just create a private endpoint, and that private endpoint that will be the endpoint that you can attach to your own virtual network, and because it's attached on your own virtual network, so it gives you a private IP. So you can easily to control the routing to that private IP and to filter all the traffic that goes through from your AVD environment to that private IP. So in most of cases that we deploy some resource on the Azure storage or the app services or SQL database, Cosmos DB, that you can for all kind of those PaaS services, you can leverage this private endpoint. And between your private endpoint to your AVD environment, that the connection, because the connection stayed on your private network, and everything that is stayed at the Microsoft backbone network. So that is called the private link. The private link makes sure that your traffic is never goes through the public internet, and your routing is always the optimized routing. So
So this is talking about obviously gateway broker web traffic, and then essentially if we're not using RDP Shortpath, we are still connecting or being tunneled through the gateway to the VMs via that private link as well, right? So essentially we'll be able to see how much bandwidth is going in and out to the Microsoft PaaS services and monitor that if needed. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing to raise here is also that private link, whilst it's in preview directly for the AVD broker services and the PaaS component of AVD, you can also put private link into other areas of it. And Michael, I might put you on the spot here around, things like Nerdio that deploy a separate app service, a separate database, and all those things. We can apply private endpoints to all of that, can't we?
Absolutely. So, public access is enabled by default to the app service. You can secure it using MFA and conditional access, but for our more security conscious customers, we can further secure that by applying private endpoints to all of them and network peering. So, access is restricted to a specific network or for a dump host or an Azure Bastion. So that cannot be tied down. And just one thing that I want to clarify too, with the user communications to access AVD, Nerdio doesn't change any of those communication paths like some other vendors do, Citrix, VMware. It's all using AVD native. So I just wanted to clarify that part of it as well. Yeah,
it's
awesome.
a really good point.
So then, Michael, I mean, do you see a lot of your customers looking to lock down and harden Nerdio? Like, only allow access, say, from the management portal from on-prem IPs and not, expose it externally? Like, what's sort of the general consensus that people are going?
Yeah, we've been working with a lot of like finance and customers and government agencies, and we kind of lead into that. We've recently released a reference architecture that helps guide our customers from the get-go on how to deploy that upfront. And yeah, a lot of those customers just leading with that straight away.
Yeah, no, awesome. So you know what? Speaking of Nerdio, I don't think we mentioned before. I mean, what's actually deployed as part of that Nerdio service? Because you mentioned that it's all Azure native stuff. Like we know that there's an app service there, but what are some of the other things that come down with it?
Well, there's basically 5 PaaS services. So there's the app service, which hosts the website that you can go on the GUI and configure it. We've got a SQL database, which is a PaaS service that holds all the configuration. There's a Key Vault, where we securely store all the user credentials. Application Insights, where we do all our logging and monitoring. And we've got the automation account, which of course does a lot of our automation in the background as well. So it's basically those 5 PaaS services that we deploy.
Yeah, awesome. Well, there's another one there that you mentioned, the whole Key Vault stuff, right? And talking to that via private IP and restricting access to who can do what around that. I think the other thing as well is a lot of your scripted actions, for example, inside Nerdio, you can pass through credentials using scripted actions. And the way I think Nerdio handles them is it stores them in that secure Key Vault. And then you use like PowerShell variables, and then the Nerdio service itself will go ahead and pull the secrets or the keys from that's really good stuff.
And you can secure those automations as well by using hybrid workers, so that you're not using the public endpoint of the automation account as well.
Correct.
That's awesome.
And we can if you're using Azure DevOps or like GitHub repos, we can integrate directly into those to run those scripts as well.
No, that's awesome. Well, then I guess more so on the topic around automation and whatnot. If you jump onto the next slide, I think gold image management. Yeah. So I mean, as I just mentioned, when you're building images and whatnot inside Nerdio. Actually, before I get into that, maybe let me just elaborate on how images are built traditionally in Azure, and then Michael can probably give everyone an update on what Nerdio does differently. These days now, if you were to build an AVD image, you would go out and grab a Windows 10 multi-session image, deploy it in your subscription, RDP into it, install your applications, and make it how you need it as an SOE. And then as part of that process, you'd shut down that VM and create a snapshot because you want something to roll back to. You'd power on that VM again, and then go into it and run a sysprep, right? Because we want to strip all the unique identifiers, etc., from that VM. Once that sysprep is done, that VM is generally shut down, and then only from that point onwards can we go into the Azure portal and say, cool, I want to capture this image and store it in like a shared image gallery or something like that to then reuse moving forward for all of my other VMs that I'm going to build. And then you'd go and create a host pool and select that image and say, I want 50 hosts from this image, and we're done. But then to then go back into that image and make changes, it's kind of like a rinse and repeat process where you need to deploy that same image to a new VM, crack it open. Sorry, not the image, you deploy the snapshot because the image has already been sysprepped. So you'd want a sort of a point in time snapshot to go back, make those changes, and then repeat the process. So, I mean, in terms of Nerdio, how does that differ or help the process?
We simplify it. So it's so Nerdio gives you the option, so we can ingest like an Azure VM template that you have available. You can import like one of your compute galleries that may have your images, or you can start fresh with an Azure Marketplace image, right? But once it's in Nerdio and you've done all your application updates, whether that be manual or like via SCCM or whatever mechanism you use, it's just like a simple click of a button. You set as image. All that stuff you mentioned, like the Microsoft recommended optimizations for virtual desktops, the sysprep to generalize, we do all that for you. It creates an iteration of that image, so we can always roll back if there's an issue. And those images are available to apply to host pools of our choice. So we can apply it to a staging to test when we're happy, to production, and we can also schedule that, so we can automate a lot of that process. So take out human error and that sort of thing from the entire process.
Yeah, so it's pretty much just bridging the gap with some components that Microsoft isn't offering at the moment, and simplifying it, and again putting it in a single pane of glass and going down that route.
And at the same time, we have got that backup capability DR. We can also apply to multiple compute galleries and regions, or like with a few clicks of a button. So, it just saves the admins a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. What about things like, if I've got a machine here that's got, say, like a Splunk agent or a SCCM agent or something on there, and I need to strip its unique identifiers. Is Nerdia able to, run like a script or something on that and have that?
Yeah. As I mentioned before, you can integrate with your own repos, but you can add your custom scripts and run those during the build process, during the sealing process. There's lots of like different factors where you can run those custom scripts as needed.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then that's also using those key vault variables that we mentioned earlier, right? So if we have that key vault set up correctly, we store all of our passwords in there, and then the end user pretty much doesn't even see what those variables are. We just pass the PowerShell variables across to it, and it handles the rest for us. So no one's sort of looking over anyone's shoulder around that.
And to bring us back to a security landscape, I guess golden image is really important to get right. And to secure and lock down appropriately, right? Obviously, based on what you're trying to do inside your environment, maintaining a good golden image is a big part of maintaining the security that you're applying to that environment. So making sure you've got something like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, right? Making sure you've got an antivirus solution inside that setup. Making sure that you're encrypting the disk, right? Making sure that you're doing those components as you're setting up that golden image is really important, because as you then publish it to a compute library, then an image library, then it can deploy out from there.
Yeah.
But also things like app locker. Like, I think people don't necessarily understand is when you're trying to test app locker, you want to obviously do it inside that golden image, because once you've deployed it, it's done, right? It's out there. It's in the wild. So you need to make sure that your GPO settings that you're testing are all done on that golden image, so that you can then confirm that it's the same user experience when it gets deployed. So, George, a question to you maybe, because I know that there's something an area that you've worked on is the Laps component, right? And how would you go about deploying or using Laps in something like AVD?
So just before I jump into Laps, that whole thing about setting policies to golden images and that kind of stuff. Generally, what I see is people don't domain join their images, and that's purely for the fact that if you need to roll back, you're not going to get any, the machines falling off the domain because passwords are, recycled, etc. So with that kind of stuff, I mean, you might look at just using group policy and putting in a test you're doing your app locker stuff and all that. But then when we talk about Laps, Laps is, for those that don't know, is local admin password solution. It rotates passwords as it goes along. So because our gold images aren't generally domain joined, we can still use Laps and deploy the agent as part of the sysprep process or as part of like an install process to get the Laps agent on those VMs. And then once the machine comes online and does a whole domain join, as long as the local administrator password or the account is the same or active when that VM comes on the domain, then Laps itself will then go ahead and rotate the password. So whatever password we're using to build the image, whatever we've handed out to our users, say, hey, go and build this image for me. Once that machine goes live, that password's going to be generated and stored in Active Directory from that point onwards. So then, there's no sort of backdoor left floating there that people can go in and log in and gain access sort of as a local administrator account. And you can take that one step further and just disable it as well with Laps as well. You've got the ability to do that. So I think that's a real key point there, just making sure that we don't have the same password floating around on 50, 60, 100 VMs, whatever we've got deployed. That'd be a bad idea. Just keep mindful of time as well. We've probably only got about 10 minutes left. Let's talk about some Microsoft Defender things. I guess with this, we've got Microsoft Defender for Endpoints. So that's sort of like the cloud, Azure cloud solution, looking over our VMs and telling us, security scores and things like that. And we've also got Defender inside, like antivirus and that kind of stuff, running on the VMs. People might be running their own AV or whatever the case is. But I guess in regards to the Defender on the actual virtual machine, so our antivirus that comes built in, we want to make sure that when we're deploying these policies, we use a lot of things like FSLogix, MSI app attach. They're being attached to the VM as users log in, and we generally don't want them to be scanned each time users log in. So you need to make sure that the correct exclusions are put in place to prevent things from interfering with that, load process. Are there any other things, I guess, Ray, that you can probably suggest or see, what your other customers are doing in terms of, the cloud component of Defender and sort of, what they're doing, what they're deploying, what they're seeing out in the industry?
Right, yeah. So for the security, is like we need to have a very comprehensive overall protection solution. It's not just like to monitoring your endpoint devices, but we also need to have the defender for example, like for your identity, to manage and secure your hybrid identities and to make sure your employee, your partner, and your customer access everything that is secured. And we also need to monitor the cloud apps because we already have the AVD on Azure, so we may also have some cloud native services. So we don't want to have the shadow IT. So we want to have the ability to discover and control the use of the shadow IT and protect the very sensitive information that anywhere in your cloud to make sure there is no cyber threats or some malicious behavior that is happening. And for your email and your documents on your Office 365, that we also have the visibility that's provided by the Defender for Office 365, that to prevent, for example, like the people that the account has been compromised and someone just from the US to log into your account and do some mass deletion or mass downloading from your internal SharePoint download and send out a lot of very sensitive company data to the external party. So that's all the things that we want to look at.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Ray, because I think the thing about AVD, Ray, is we tend to think about just the session host itself and securing the network around that. But it's also about making sure that we're looking at security from the identity that's coming into it and all the services and components that they could potentially be using inside AVD and how we can secure that. And the Defender range definitely helps with finding and identifying all those gaps.
Right. And another thing that is a lot of company, a lot of customers that they are facing is how to make sure their environment is compliant. So the Microsoft Defender, it gives us the visibility about the compliance, so it can easily to help us to have a report on all the security controls and the compliance controls and let us know, where is the area that we should work at.
Ray, quick question. Does Defender tie in with Sentinel as a single pane of glass as well? Can we get that info?
Yeah. So everything that can be easily integrated and be unified into the same the Microsoft Sentinel. So you get the visibility across all entire environment from everywhere.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Beautiful. I think the next slide there, Chris, is probably one that a lot of people will be familiar when it comes to security, especially for, not just AVD, but any sort of remote desktop environment. USB redirection, right? I've had a lot of companies out there that, like to disable the USB redirection because they're sort of very hesitant around, viruses coming in via USB sticks, that kind of stuff. But then, we also want to look at clipboard redirection. So people copying, pasting data in and out of those environments. One way to get around that, there's two screenshots at the bottom. The one on the left is a new feature that's just been released in AVD, which is AVD watermarking. So it basically puts a QR code in front of the session, so anybody takes a screenshot, whatever, we can trace that back and see who that user was that leaked that data. And then on the right hand side, we've got screen capture protection as well. So if someone wants to open up, like the clipping tool or the snipping tool and try print screen, take a screenshot, whatever, it just comes up black. It doesn't actually present anything. So there's another way that we can sort of I guess harden a lockdown, and stop data from being leaked. But then at the same time, you still want to look at implementing, your correct session timeouts. So if someone walks away from a computer or something like that, it locks in a timely fashion. You want to make sure your GPO loopback processing is turned off. So you don't want specific map drives being, added to a device, when they log in, so they can copy data around the network that way and then potentially, catch it from another location from their laptop or whatever. But I think the two biggest ones there are probably your app locker and your application masking, right? So these are applications and access to things that the user shouldn't have access to. So like PowerShell, for example, gaining admin access or something like that. We can use a lot of these policies to then stop and prevent our users from, going around and looking inside the system environment and trying to figure out a way to bypass these protocols and policies we put in place.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to be mindful of, and I know it's a bit of a buzz term at the moment, but the essential A. framework, right, from ACS, right? So obviously, GPO is a really strong, and app masking are really app blocker, app masking, and GPO are three really strong controls that you can use to, I guess, more or less adhere towards or work towards your maturity levels inside the Essential 8 program as well. So I think it's, these new features that are coming out with watermarking, especially, I think is another level of that protection, and more about the discovery post, but also using those other features, we can make sure that we're meeting those maturity 1, 2, and 3 kind of requirements. Yeah,
absolutely. I think we've got a customer recently that we've done some Essential 8 security hardening for, and although when we talk about security hardening, we're essentially making something that's simple to us in our everyday lives and hardening it, and then we need to find a new way or a workaround to bypass that to be able to do our jobs correctly, but also have the environment hardened. So we've deployed the Essential 8 policies. We're using Nerdio to do some of the deployment. We're using a group policy to do some of the deployment. Yes, it's a little bit painful, but at the end of the day, the end result is that the customer is compliant, and knowing that a lot of these technologies work around that, or there are ways for the IT admin to script or do their workload a different way to achieve the same result, is great, and it's good to know that that's there if needed. I think we've probably come around to the end of the session. There's only 2 minutes left. I kind of just wanted to open up the floor to anybody. If anybody had any questions or concerns around anything that we've discussed today, or maybe if there's any info or more information that you want in the background. If anyone's interested in any of the Nerdio hardening stuff, you can just Google, go onto the Nerdio website and look at Nerdio hardening, and you can find instructions on how to harden the app service, and put some private endpoints, private links, and really secure that environment. Obviously, with the Microsoft Defender stuff, just looking at the Microsoft documentation online and seeing, things around Azure Firewall, Microsoft Defender, how to set up private links, that kind of stuff. All the information is available on the internet. But does anybody have any questions before we wrap up for this one? Lax.
Hey guys, this is Dom. I'm with Lax at the moment. I just have a question regarding the Azure Firewall. You said it utilizes the Microsoft threat intelligence for that intrusion protection. Can it integrate other, say, like third-party sources of intelligence at all for that intrusion prevention?
I'll hand that one to Ray for the second, because I'll hand it to Ray. It's probably best.
Right. Yeah. So we have the intelligent security graph. So I think that. So do you want to have the third-party threat intelligence data that being integrated into Azure Firewall, or you want to leverage the third-party the threat intelligence capability?
Alongside the Microsoft intelligence.
Right. So there is a way that you can easily just pull all the data from the third party into the Azure Firewall. That is supported.
I guess it is possible, and to answer the question a little bit deeper there for Lax is I guess the other thing you want to make sure is that you're not overlapping, because you've got to remember Microsoft already ingest a lot of third-party threat intelligence into their platform. So you want to make sure that you're not overlapping and doubling up essentially on the same intelligence.
Yeah, right. So there is a way that you can export and import all the data from the third party into Azure Firewall for the threat intelligence.
Awesome, thanks.
Cool. Any other questions from anyone on the call today? Awesome. Chris, do you want to just jump to the next slide? So as I mentioned at the beginning, there are discussion series that we run monthly. We do have a list of these on our YouTube page. So if you want to go up there and re-watch some of the ones that we've done in the past, feel free to.